Hi, this is Mike Zellers. I had a heck of a bad time recording this lecture in front of the live class and someone watching it online. I did some steps in the wrong order and that really messed everything up. So I'm going to try to do it right this time for you folks. And I apologize to the people that viewed the original disaster of a lecture, and no more said about that one. All right. So I am recording it. All right. And I'm sharing the screen. I'm going to go in and pull up the tutorial, because what I want to do is I want to do the tutorial that was assigned last week. The reason I'm doing this, even though I had a video last week, is this is such an important concept that I want to really be sure that you know what's going on with it. All right. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create a Razor Page app in Visual Studio. So I go up here. Again, some of the details, depending on the version of Visual Studio you're running, might look a little different, but you should be able to get the meaning from what I'm doing here. File, new project. I'm going to pick ASP.NET web application. If I don't see it up here, I can do a search for that, ASP.NET Core Web Application. That's the one I'm going to use. I get to give it a name. I'm going to call it Razor Page Movie. And I'm going to put it on the desktop. Click Create. What do I want to create? I want to create a project template for creating an ASP.NET Core application with example ASP.NET Razor Page content. That's what we've been doing so far. I click that, and I get the same old pages that we saw before when we run this. Or we get an error message. Instead of I express run Razor Page Movie in that little box, and it should work fine. Now, a few of you have noticed that it's tough styling these things. One of my suggestions is to use the Google Chrome Inspect Element tool to look at, and you can see what CSS applies to a given page. Let's go to a different page than this. Let's go to, let's just go to Google. And I can say more tools, developer tools, and I can pick what it is I want to check. So let's say I'm interested in this div. I can click on that. I can see the style that applies to it and how it got the style. Going up sort of on the list is how it gets the style. All right. The top one, I believe, being the one that overrides everything else. So if you can't figure out how to set the style, look to see what is setting the style, and then you can go and override that in your style sheet. Remember, if you put a second style sheet after the first style sheet, the second style sheet will override what's in the first. All righty. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a model. All right. What do I mean by creating a model? There's two things that go on within a typical application. You have your database, all right, which stores the data. And then you have the classes and objects that are actually used within your program to access the data, doing stuff to it, and saving it. There needs to be a sort of link between the database and your program, and that's what those classes are. In this particular entity frame core app, there's a couple approaches that you can take. You can, for example, design the database first, and then let the database generate the classes that you're going to be using in your code. Or you can create the model first and use that to generate the database. And these are called either code first or database first. Database first would definitely be useful if you already had a database defined. Code first, I think, is useful, especially if you're starting a new project, which we are doing here. All right. So I'm going to create models, and the model is the object or the class within our C# program that is linked to the database. All right. So I right mouse here. I'm going to create a folder. In here called models. And inside models, I'm going to click on add and add a new class. I'm going to give it the right name. And remember that you should give descriptive names there. Don't leave it at class 1 like it was set the default. I'm going to verify what they call it within the tutorial. All right, they call it movie. So that's what I'll do. I click add. It will create the template for an empty class. And what I can do is I can paste the code from the tutorial right in here. Namespaces are a way to identify where the code for something lives, what version of the code you're using, and so on. That is done so that the compiler can find the code to make sure that things are compiled correctly. That's not what I want to copy. I want to copy the using. And we want to use this component because we're going to use this in our example. The using, not the namespace, is what shows the compiler where that code is so it can compile things correctly. All right, I'm going to copy the rest of it. So I'm developing my model first, and from the model, we are going to generate the database. It's important that we keep these things in sync. If they get out of sync, then problems start. All right. So we're going to make all our changes to the models here. If we want to add a database table, we will add it to the model. If we want to change a column or add a relationship, we will do it in the model. The database will get generated from the model. And the model is sort of the pipeline from the database into our C# program. So we do this. We're going to save it. And here's where I did it wrong the last time. All right. I'm going to go in, and I did another step before this step, and this step is the next step. We want to add a folder. Okay, before we scaffold, we want to add a folder. So I'm going to add a new folder, and I'm going to call that movies. It's important that the folder doesn't match the name of the class exactly. I've run into problems when I've done that. All right. So we create a new folder for movies. This is where we're going to put all the pages that deal with movies. So I'm going to right mouse and I'm going to say add new scaffolded item. What is a scaffolded item? A scaffolded item is where Visual Studio generates sort of a shell of a web page that does very basic functionality that we can make changes to as we see fit. All right. You can think of the initial sample web pages that that Visual Studio created as like scaffolds. That's something for us to build on. It created something for us to build on. And we're going to create things, web pages for the movies. And Visual Studio is going to generate them. And then we can go back and edit them if we want. So under what we're going to scaffold, I'm going to scaffold Razor pages using Entity Framework CRUD. Very inelegant name, but what CRUD stands for is the basic database functions: create, retrieve, update, and delete. So it's going to create functionality for us to add new movies to the movie table, retrieve movies from the movie table, update, and delete. I'm going to click add. What model class do I want to use? Well, I want to use the movie. What data context? I have not yet defined the database yet. So this is where I go and click add. And we get sort of the default name for the data context. So I'm going to add that. Take the defaults for this. We want to use a layout page and we want reference script libraries. We want to use the view start file, so we leave that blank. I click add, and away Visual Studio goes, installing new packages because we now want to address the database, so it has to download packages from the web. Remember, this is a component-based system, and you can have difficulty if you don't have the proper component installed. All right? Don't get frustrated if that happens. In the old days, applications were monolithic. In other words, you would write a program that did everything. These days, things are based on components, which means that a certain function is handled by one component, a certain function is handled by another. Now, there's a lot of benefits that come from that, but it does give added complexity. All right? And the added complexity is that you have to make sure all the components are there and all the components are talking to each other. So if you run into difficulty, don't spend tons of time trying to figure it out. Email me and let me know what's up, and I'll do my best to try to answer your question. All right, it generated these pages for us. All right, all well and good. But we're not quite there yet because we have not created the database yet. We've just said what database we're going to use. To create the database from our model, we go to Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and Package Manager Console. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a migration. What is a migration? A migration allows us to do, how do I want to say it? To do, update the database. Let me Google this. I'm forgetting the word I want to use. Incremental updates to the database. In other words, since we're creating a database from the model, we don't want to recreate the database every single time we make a change in the model. We only want to update the database with the changes that have been made. So in other words, if I were to add a column to the movie table, I wouldn't want to delete the movie table and all the entries that I've made in the movie table. I would simply want to add that column to the existing movie table. So by creating a migration, what you're doing is you are recording what the current state of the database is, and the next time you create a migration, it will include all the stuff since the last migration was made. So I'm going to call this initial. It does its thing, builds a while. It gives us a warning about something in the price column. We don't have to worry about that. All right. So that created the migration. Now we need to apply the migration to the database, and we do that by typing in update database. It will do its thing. It probably will give us the same warning, but we should be good to go. Now we have these scaffolded pages in the movies folder for create, delete, details, edit, and index. By default, it's going to call the index file. All right, if we don't specify the specific page we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to update the navigation in my shared file to include that new movie section in the movies pages. Okay, now we want to go and add the link to the movies to the navigation. So we copy this LI because this is the LI in the navigation. I'm going to change this to movies/index, and I'm going to call it movies. So now when I run this, I click on that, and I get to the movies index page, which shows me a blank list of movies because we have not defined any movies. I can now click new or create, and I can type in the title of the movie, the release date, the genre, and the price, and save it. Then it gets added to the list. We have an edit functionality where I can change the item. And we have details where we can see it without being able to edit it. And finally, we can delete it if we want to. All right, that's all well and good, but we should not just accept the code that it generates from us. We should look at it and make sure that we understand it. So let's look at these one at a time. We're first going to start with the index page. The index page under movies, we're going to pull up both the CSS_HTML and the model. My suggestion is that you look at these pages after you created them. Look at both the CSS_HTML and the model associated with that index CSS_HTML, and try to get a sense of how they work. This is definitely a different kind of syntax because we're not actually using SQL statements. We're calling the model and asking the model to give us a list. And that will return in this variable movie a list of movies that the CSS_HTML can loop through and display the title, release date, genre, price, for all of the things in the database for that movie, along with the names for the columns, which will either be the column name or if we use a data annotation, a different name. Similarly, there's a create. Notice how simple this is. To add a movie, you simply call on the database context for that particular model, call add, and give it a movie object. Very, very, very straightforward. Go through all of these. Go through all these and make sure that you have a pretty good idea what all of them do. You may not understand every individual little piece of syntax. That will become more important later on as we try altering these things. But review them and bring any questions that you have for class. All right. There's more to the tutorial about using a search function and so on, but I think we got through the bulk of it. All right. If you have any questions, please bring them to class or email me. All right. Thank you. And I will be posting this. Well, that's ridiculous for me to tell you when I'm posting this, right? Because you won't be able to hear it until I post it. So I'll post it when I post it. All right. Take care.